Hi, everybody. Welcome to Talking Data Equity. It's Friday, February 20th, and we are so happy that you are here. My name is Heather Kraus. I'm a mathematical statistician, and I'm the founder of an organization called We All Count. And We All Count hosts Talking Data Equity, which happens most Fridays. Not every single Friday, but most Fridays. And the Zoom link stays the same, and it's a drop in event. So I'm going to share the link right now where you can go, the Talking Data Equity homepage, where you can always check out what we're doing because it varies widely from Friday to Friday. And you are always welcome, and you're always welcome to bring friends and colleagues. It is an informal drop in that is designed to give you some practical, concrete support in aligning your data work with your community values and priorities, as well as in these very turbulent times to give you a solid human reminder that you are not alone and that data equity still exists and it still matters. And if you are interested in one of the Talking Data Equity topics, but you can't attend live, I just put the link in the chat to our Data Equity Community Forum. And that is where we'll put the recording from today. And there's lots and lots of recordings. We're going into our 5th year of Talking Data Equity. So there's many recordings on lots of different topics. And we'll also put all the links to the resources in the forum. And that is also a place, if it's not a Friday and you want to be reminded that you are not alone in your data equity work, you can go in there and ask a question or share a resource or just check in, and you will get some fantastic responses. And in fact, it is an amazing conversation from our data equity forum that today's topic and speaker is based on. This is a much requested topic, and I was very hesitant to bring in some of the so-called experts or hype people around AI until there was a really cool conversation about equity and ethics and AI in that We All Count Data Equity Forum. And I reached out to Danica and asked if they would come and share some of their wisdom and insights and lived experiences that they had been sharing in the forum. And so before I introduce Danica, some of you are here for the first time. So I just want to give a little bit of logistics. We'll be together till a little bit before 1 o'clock Eastern time, so about an hour. And while our guest speaker is sharing their stories and their slides, we ask that you do keep your microphone turned off just at the start. Feel free at any point to use the Zoom chat in any way that's useful to you. And then we will have time for live microphones on discussion, question and answers, and sharing. So some of you, many of you already know Danica. She came before as a Talking Data Equity guest and shared some very cool HR people analytics work. And we are very lucky and excited to have them back. Danica is a people analytics consultant who supports stakeholders in transforming workforce data into clear, actionable insights. Their experience spans marketing research, impact evaluation, employee experience, strategic workforce planning, and more recently, data governance. Working with people data, for example, consumer, student, employee, and community data, has led them to seek ways to center equity in their work, especially now during the AI era, to ensure that we are safeguarding the communities represented within this data. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Danica. Thank you so much for making time in your schedule to join us and share your very cool ideas and approach to data equity and AI.
Of course, I'm excited to be here again. So let me share my screen and then we can get going.
Awesome.
All right, can everyone see?
Yes, but it's not in like
There.
presentation mode yet. Yeah, but we can
Yeah.
definitely see
Okay.
it. Beautiful. Perfect. Thanks.
All right, perfect. So I know Heather gave a bit of an intro for me, but I also wanted to kind of explain the perspective in which I'm coming to AI adoption and AI usage from. She obviously spoke a bit around like my experience when it comes to working within the data analytics space. The fact that I currently and have for the past like 4 years or so have been working with employee data explicitly, which is oftentimes considered some of the most sensitive data an organization might have. As you can imagine, when it comes to HR, we have a lot of information about our employees that go beyond just like, what role do you have? Like, where do you sit within an organization? How much money do you make? To even like social security numbers and tax IDs, because that's tied to how we compensate and pay people, demographic information and things of that sort. So it's a space where we have to be really conscientious of how we're leveraging data and making sure that we're in alignment with the myriad of like laws and regulations that might apply to us. As someone who works at a global organization, that is even more complex, especially in the AI era, as we're seeing a lot of different AI laws come out, like the EU AI Act that went into effect this year, to like even state level laws like within the United States. So it's a really complex space for us to operate within, which is makes the necessity of being really good stewards of employee data even more important. Within my position, I don't necessarily have decision-making power about like what technology I have accessible to me when it comes to doing my day-to-day job. Instead, I have to use what I'm given while also making sure that I'm doing the best I can with what I have. And so that has kind of like landed me in the spot of being a cautious or conscientious AI adopter, working in a the tech industry for a tech company. Either we're building AI tools ourselves, which the company I work for is doing, but we also have AI tools that we as employees can utilize. But at the same time, like an organization might say, like, hey, you now have Gemini within your Google Workspace or Copilot within your Microsoft work environment accessible to you. Go ahead and use them. But like what I found is that we aren't always given like more of that like nuance instruction or guardrails of saying like, okay, this is available to me. I'm not sure exactly how to use it, or like when it comes to that mindset of data ethics, equity, privacy, like how do I make sure that like my usage isn't crossing a line within that space? Ooh. Um, so that's kind of like why it's like so critical. Like when we're dealing with data that's about people, whether it's employees, your funders, the community, even yourself as someone who's interacting directly with the AI tool. We're hearing more and more stories now about how these tools can either be misused or being used intentionally, but can lead to like really extensive harms to individuals or communities at large. And so AI like doesn't sit within an isolated environment. It is something that's embedded within the socio political like realities of the world. And that stuff shows up in how a tool is developed, how it's deployed, how it's trained, what data it's trained on, how we as individual users interact with it, and the outcomes that it can then ultimately have on folks. And so to like help guide us on that like that question of like, all right, I've got something like Google Workspace accessible to me. Like I'm being told to use Gemini to help me in my work. Like how do I do so? This is where the responsible AI principles like really come into play, and can really provide a framework. And so when you are like looking across a lot of the big like tech companies that are developing AI, whether it's someone like OpenAI or Anthropic who has Claude, or Google, Microsoft, IBM, you'll see a lot of them state their essentially like their AI principles, which some of which are like reflected here. But I think when you get into that like responsible and like you're really focusing and prioritizing responsibility while centering the communities, that's where I feel like there's some unique stuff. So Things that you'll see fairly common across AI principles are things like transparency and explainability. Like, can we understand how the AI tool is working from like, I gave it this prompt, this is the outcome or this is what it's outputting. Like, how is it getting to that point and what decisions are being made so that I can interrogate them and try to balance out those like hidden power dynamics between those who are developing and deploying the tools and those of us who are using them and being impacted by them. Fairness and biases mitigation is kind of like a clear connection when it comes to data equity. And so this is where, how are we making sure that we're not reinforcing existing or historical inequities that exist today, and that can exist within the data itself, but obviously even in like who's designing the tool and like what principles or ideology are they bringing into it. And so how are we disrupting those so that we aren't creating similar outcomes of inequities broader in communities, and like also not like amplifying them more so than what has been possible before AI came to play. Human in the loop, that is kind of like that process of making sure that you aren't just leaving AI to do what it wants to do on its own. I think especially as we're getting into the agentic phase of AI, where you can pretty much like assign a different task or things to do, and it can do it on its own, but you still have people involved, especially when there's like different levels of risk with the use cases that you might be applying. So for example, one of the most like common use cases that I use AI for is usually doing research or like drafting a document. That has some risk, but it's a lot lower because I'm not inputting information about specific people, which reduces like the potential for things like data leakage or things of that sort. But if I were to be doing something like that, and I'd say like, hey, I want you to analyze this like row level employee data that includes personal identifiable information or sensitive information, and then give me a summary or recommendations, then suddenly I'm stepping up kind of like that risk ladder. And that's where like even more human intervention is required to make sure that we are aligning ourselves to our other core principles and we're mitigating risk for those who are like represented in the data. And when we get to like data sovereignty and data privacy, I think more often you see privacy called out in principles across different tech companies, but you don't really see the sovereignty part called out as much. And so this is like, how are we really respecting the autonomy of individuals and communities, especially when you think about data AI models are being developed and you're just like, I actually have no idea like what data was pulled out from the ether and used to like develop and train these models. But then even like I'm not sure when I'm interacting with an AI tool what of my data is being collected as I'm doing so. And one of the things that like we're seeing, and that if you're following AI experts, especially like along ethics and responsible AI kind of like collectives, like you're seeing folks calling out those examples of like, oh, in LinkedIn, you've got to be careful because AI is being released. You need to go into your settings and opt out of your data being collected or used for AI and things of that sort. So a lot of these tools, if you're like signing up and using an account, especially for free, are leaning more towards kind of like an opt-out model with users versus an opt-in model. And so like that even of itself has its own ethical implications. And then you have accountability and governance. And so think of this really as like the rules and the guardrails that an organization says AI should be used, or data as well. Data should be used within like particular contexts and purposes. And this really helps to build out like clear accountability structures, roles and responsibilities, things of that sort, so that when someone gains access to data and when someone gains access to an AI tool and they're using those things together, they're really clear on like what they can and cannot do or should not do in order to prevent data privacy, regulatory risk, or any other potential like negative outcomes. And then this last piece is another piece that I feel like I haven't seen quite as much amongst like the big tech companies, and that's that principle of really focusing on the community and centering your design within that. I think like what we've observed kind of like big picture with a lot of these AI tools, like the chat GPTs, the Claudes, the Geminis and things of that sort, is that there was like this rush to get these products out into market so that they can be commercialized and monetized on be like to the benefit of the organizations. But then like we started seeing people using these tools for all these different types of use cases or purposes that may not have been thought about or were thought about, and precautions were put into place. And then we see like really, really harmful things happening from like being supported in your suicidality, like ideation, and like people following through with those types of behaviors, which is like awful. And an AI tool like discouraging them from seeking help or telling other people and things of that sort. And so I think when you're like really centering the work within the community itself and not just from like your perspective of what the community needs, but making sure you're bringing the community into the design of these tools, but also like the application of these tools makes a really big difference. And so I kind of like walked through the responsible AI principles in terms of like what are they and how does that help you think about AI from the context of a data equity perspective. And so now I'm going to kind of like talk through the like the more so of like where might you have opportunities to apply those principles when you're actually like using AI. I will say that like I'm making an assumption that a lot of us, a lot of y'all like me, aren't really in positions where we're or we may be in an organization that's not building AI itself, but we're more so like using AI from an external vendor. You'll notice in like throughout these kind of like categories and bullet points that there's different levels of where you might feel like you have control or influence, and then areas where you absolutely may not have control or influence, but really kind of like within that broader life cycle of using an AI product from an external vendor, like where can you apply these principles? So the first bucket that I outline is really just like create your responsible AI infrastructure. And the first part of this is really kind of sitting down and thinking, what's my like organization and teams and like personal mission, like values and principles and things of that sort, and making sure that's driving your decisions around technology usage versus like the inverse, where like right now I feel like it's really tempting to like lean towards like, oh, there's really cool technology out there, how can we use this? I think more so starting for first with like, what are we here to do, who are we serving, like what is the context around those people, communities, and what have you. Like now, can technology be leveraged in service of that, or are there ways in which technology might actually go against our mission and values? Then you have aspects around like governance. I know the previous presenter, like 2 weeks ago, spoke about governance in and of itself. You've got data governance, you've got AI governance. They're separate, but they're also very much related to one another. But again, like this is where like an organization and even like individual teams and people can lean in and help to say like, okay, AI is here, we're expected to use it, but like what are those rules and guardrails for us to do so that we're doing it in a responsible manner? And then like making sure that we're educating ourselves in our organizations when it comes to AI literacy and responsible AI adoption. I know a lot of times when technology comes out, especially when has like a really simple user interface that's familiar to us, you just open up, a chat with an AI tool, you type in a prompt, super easy. We've all been on Google doing searches and other products for like decades at this point in time. So like the barrier to using some of these like really consumerized AI tools is really low, but at the same time, like taking the time to learn how to use it effectively, efficiently, how to like get what we need out of it, and also how to guide it in a way that's in alignment with our principles and values is still like really, really important as well. And then you have like the use case bucket. So this is an area where I think it's really helpful to spend time even before you start using an AI tool, especially at an organizational level, especially when we're dealing with data about people and like particularly with sensitive and vulnerable populations. Is start off with just kind of like documenting your potential use cases. What is it that you're hoping to use AI for? Why? evaluate that and say, like, what are the benefits of this particular use case? Like, what does it help us to achieve versus not using AI? But also, what are the risks and who is potentially impacted by this use case? So when we talk about that from like a data equity perspective, it's like, what populations data are we passing through this tool? Like, what could be the risk to them? And then also making sure that, like, if you're if you're really wanting to lean into this from like a community centered perspective, like, don't go through this exercise by yourselves. Like, go through this exercise with the community members who really will be represented in the data that you're going to be passing through the tool, because you might have a different risk tolerance from them, but if you violate their risk tolerance, then that's where you can kind of end up in a situation where you break their trust and could have negative consequences towards your, not only like your brand, but if you break their trust, as well as break potentially like laws or regulations, then that's where there can be like things like fines and other repercussions that are much larger. And then as you're going through this like evaluation exercise, determine if AI should actually be applied with that use case, and if so, what precautions might need to be put into place. So, for an example, with employee data, some of the precautions that like we share, not only like across the people analytics team that I'm on, but with those who get like reports from us, which could be like HR business partners or managers across the business. It's like data minimization. Do not put in information that you do not need to put in. To things like, there's lower risk when it comes to sharing, aggregated or summarized data in a tool compared to like row level data in the tool, and things of that sort. Or if you're asking the tool to do some sort of like advanced statistical analyses, but like you yourself don't have like the skill sets or the associated with that type of statistical analyses, then maybe that's something that you ask the people analytics team to step in and partner with you on. Or do you need to make sure that you're having the people with that subject matter expertise participate in that like human in the loop analysis to make sure that you're able to appropriately interrogate what the output is of the AI model based off of your prompt, and if it makes sense or if it's inaccurate and things of that sort before perceiving to, taking steps or actions off of the information. And then in the last bucket, we've got like determine which tools can be used and for what. This is where you have an opportunity, or possibly at this point not, because a lot of these Gen AI tools have been out for a bit at this point. But assess the AI tools against your needs. Make sure that you're obtaining the appropriate license for the AI tool for your organization, because that has different levels of data privacy and data controls. So if you sign up for a free license with like ChatGPT or like Gemini, for example, your interactions with that tool could then create data that is turned around and used to train models in the future. And so like that's where we get into some of those individual data privacy concerns, but also that like data leak concern when it comes to community or employee data that you might put in the tool. If you go to like an individual free license, there might be a little bit more protections and controls, but it's really that kind of like enterprise level license that has like the most privacy and controls built into it. And so that's why you'll oftentimes see organizations say, like, you can use these tools, but you can't use these tools. And they're really trying to mitigate the proliferation of like shadow AI, which is basically the usage of unapproved tools within the organizational context, because that's when like confidential information and private information can be at greater risk. And then underneath that, like, create your AI usage policies. I know that kind of goes along the lines of something I spoke to previously when I said determine if AI should be applied here. But this is where something that like I did at Red Hat last year, where we were hearing from like HR business partners that they were starting to use AI, or they weren't like confident on like what they could use AI with when it came to associate data. So like what I did was create, I think, like a 3 to 4 page document that said, okay, these are the company's like AI principles. Here are some really quick do's and don'ts. And for example, you would say like, do use an enterprise tool, don't use a non-enterprise approved tool, and things of that sort. And then I also gave like an example of like a quite a few examples of like use cases for employee data within the context of HR, and said like these are the benefits, these are the risks. Here's actually an explicit risk level, and with these risk levels, like these are the type of precautions you should take to try to mitigate the harm that could come of that. And then from like the educational piece, I also had an appendix within that document as well that said like that would help kind of like give people more awareness on potential AI biases and harms so that they're understanding more of the why behind we want to be really precaution or really careful with using AI with employee data, as well as like more of a kind of a detailed checklist of like when we say human in the loop, this is what we mean and this is what it looks like. And these are the types of steps that you can take. So really kind of trying to like do a little bit of like cognitive offloading for other folks where we're really making it clear like this is how you should use AI and this is how you shouldn't when it comes to employee data, and let us make sure you understand why, and when we're asking you to take certain steps you understand like what that really means. And then ultimately, at the organization level too, auditing behaviors and outcomes of the AI tools. This is an area where I don't have like quite as much like depth of like visibility into within the organizations that I've worked with or worked for over the past like handful of years. But this is an area where like you might have conversations with your partners in like IT or whoever it is that is owning that enterprise license and saying like, okay, part of using these tools responsibly is making sure that like we're paying attention to how people are trying to use these tools. If they're using them in ways that are out of alignment with our usage policies and our principles and guidelines, we need to be able to spot that so that we can correct it and address it and make sure that we are using these tools in alignment with like the outcomes that we are seeking to drive within our communities. So that is pretty much like what I had to prepare just to like speak through with y'all. I wanted to leave like plenty of time for folks to ask like questions that are like more specific to the circumstances or use cases that you're navigating within your organization. So I'm gonna pause and let questions pop up.
Thank you so much, Danica. And just a couple people are already direct messaging me. Absolutely, this will be in the slides, and lots of links to the resources will be in that data equity forum. So this is a time where you can turn your microphone on, you can ask a question, you can share an experience, you can share a reflection, you can share a resource. And if you don't feel comfortable or able to turn your microphone on, you can also ask a question in the Zoom chat, either directly to me if you want to ask it privately, or put it in the chat for everybody.
And while people are thinking, I didn't show it, but like within the slides too, I have like a section that provides additional resources for like those kind of different topic areas that I walk through as well. So I wanted to give like an overarching kind of description, but also when y'all have a chance to look at the slides in your own time, like you have stuff that can help you in your journey dig in a little bit deeper.
And I'll just amplify that, Sandra, before we get to you, and say there are so many useful links in Danica's lists of resources, like a mind-blowing amount of actually useful links, not just AI marketing hype, somebody trying to convince you how good their tool is. So please do go check those out, because I do a lot of this and my mind was blown by Danica's resources. Thanks for waiting, Sandra. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to trigger a response by turning on my audio, but if that was the right way to do it, then good. So this has been amazing. I am working with a client who is pending a huge grant to launch a pilot neighborhood transformation project. And in advance of that, I'm working with them on a much smaller grant that is going to support creating a data management system to organize the data that they've already collected and create a space that is ready for all the data they anticipate collecting in the future. The end goal being an AI-assisted dashboard.
Mm.
So in a conversation with a client today, in addition to talking about all the data stuff we've been talking about, this person said, and additionally, what we're doing is building trust and repairing distrust. So this is a historically marginalized, disinvested, primarily brown and black neighborhood. So there's huge amounts of warranted distrust. And it was the first time they'd mentioned something like that. And it occurred to me that's actually going to be the other important part of what we do here. We're building this management system, but we're also building a management system that that builds that creates a space for building trust and repairing trust. And that, definitely starts with involving as many community people as possible in the actual structuring of the data management system. And so much of what you have just presented is like, I want to take it word for word and write it into all of my material because it really speaks to how you can use systems stuff to get the right people, the most meaningful people in the loop. And I guess I'm just kind of happily ranting here because of what you've provided, but I also I would love to, hear if you have any thoughts related to what I just said. And then secondarily, this organization had thought it might work with Amazon to develop their AI assisted dashboard. And without revealing too much of my personal political perspective, I kind of think that might be a dangerous idea, but I silence myself to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I mean it's a really interesting thing that you brought up because like what you're expressing could potentially be like a tension, right? You've got that dilemma of like we want, I'm assuming, to use an AI assisted dashboard because like that can be done like really like shockingly quickly compared to like what it's required for to have like a team or an individual build out a dashboard for you off of the data. There's so many different tools, like you can ask like Gemini, Claude, Cursor, all these different like Gen AI tools to say like, hey, I want you to build a dashboard for me off of this data, give it a really explicit prompt, and it can do it within like minutes to hours compared to what would be like days to months, right? And so you've got that like operational efficiency thing that you're striving for, but at the same time, you're working with a community that has a lot of distrust with like the group that you're working with. And so like there could be
Yes.
potential friction that shows up there,
Yep.
especially, like a lot of AI particularly within the US, is being developed by tech companies that are disproportionately white, disproportionately male, and may not reflect the communities that you're
Yes.
seeking to serve. And so, like that in and of itself, I feel like can immediately like raise the hackles of that community, and rightfully so. So then, like, how do you navigate through this and say, like, you know what, maybe first we need to have a conversation of like, what's that risk tolerance or awareness with like AI and what it can do and the harms that it could have within that community, and like and understanding that first, and then saying like, actually, is this really the best way for us to use AI where the AI might be creating the dashboard out the gate, or do we need to like still have a person who's developing it, managing it, but they can use AI to help them develop, like, let's say, like the SQL code or the formulas that are necessary to build out the dashboard, because you can still have a little bit of efficiencies there without, completely releasing the Kraken. Or to your point, like, is Amazon the right partner, or are there better AI partners that or better partners who are more data privacy and data justice leaning?
Right.
And I think those are the types of AI tools that are harder to discover right now because they don't have like the $1 billion pockets of like the big tech companies. But there are some out there, but it kind of depends on like what capabilities are you needing it to do, and then which is the right tool to do so. And then you still have to interrogate those vendors and like really,
Right.
really push them on that, like the data privacy, the fairness, the bias, like who owns the data? Is the data being used to
Right.
train their models that are then used with other customers? All that kind of stuff. And it could lead you down a path where you're just like, we're really frustrated, but we're not able to get to the answers that we need that would satisfy this community. And really the most important thing for us right now is to prioritize rebuilding that trust than to
Yes.
like prioritize the like operational efficiencies.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Danica. That's a fabulous answer. And I think I just want to remind everybody that this is being recorded. A couple of people are trying to write notes, and it is being recorded. We will share the recording with you for sure. And I also want to I want to amplify, Danica, your answer about, check with that community that you're rebuilding trust. I think the idea of using an AI space to rebuild trust is a very cool idea. We had Dr. Chris Anderson, who's Métis, come on a few weeks ago and talk a lot about Indigenous data sovereignty. And I just put the link to that recording in the chat. And he was very, very clear that there was no rebuilding of trust unless that community got to define success. If anyone else was going to define success, so in other words, amplifying what Danica just said, so that might be a useful recording as well. And he's written a lot about it too, if you need to kind of cite official sources. Dennis, hey, how you doing?
Hey everyone, thank you. Yeah, actually, frankly, a rough morning, but it happens to us all. So,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to hear that.
as an analyst, I'd rather be accurate than nice. So there you go. Uh,
Fair.
thank you very much, Danica, for giving this chat, and it is something that we're working through where I am as well. And it's a two-parter. First, I'll say I completely agree with double checking, make sure you know what you're talking about when looking for a prompt in AI or Gen AI. I had one running a SAS code and it swore this procedure existed that I know does not, and it doesn't work. And I tried to say, no, this is the procedure. And it kept coming back saying, no, it's something else. You're out of your mind. Whatever mind
Hallucination.
you were given to. Pure hallucination. And it changed it. I can't use this. But anyway, that's an aside. Thank you. So my question for you, it's a bit long. So trying to figure out what are your thoughts around like how to support implicit and explicit bias training as a part of AI and Gen AI use programs, and especially given that many of us kind of exist in the climate that's, how do I say this, at a high level, less tolerant of discussions and programs related to bias and discrimination. So my real concern there is that these external influences are also impacting the effect of
100%.
responsible AI use, intentionally or otherwise. I'm just wondering what we may be able to do at a local level to offset that. So please share your thoughts if you can.
Yeah, it's a very real and tough question. Like even with the principles that I created, like that usage not principles, but the usage guideline that I created last year, because I worked at a company that has federal government contracts within the U.S., which means the equal, or like not the equal opportunity, but the executive orders that like we were all getting drowned by like last year, like is impacting how we operate internally. And so I before releasing or starting to disseminate these guidelines out across the organization, I did have to have the person who leads like our inclusion strategy within the organization to review it, which she might have like done alongside legal as well, to say like, okay, is there any language in here that would potentially get us in trouble?
Right.
So it is a really tricky thing. I think one of the ways in which you can maybe try to like navigate that is focus on it from a perspective of like accuracy. Could be a way of kind of like going about it, because then you're like interrogating like how well is the model performing versus saying explicitly saying like we're focused about like biases and things of that sort. But I still am seeing like biases and harms like that language show up within conversations of AI for like these really big companies that relationships with the federal government. So I think like that's a way to approach it, is like, like we really want to make sure that this is accurate, that it's doing what we're asking it to do. And as part of that, we just have to understand the cultural, political context in which we're operating it within, and in which like our communities or who we're serving is living within too. So like then that might be saying like, what does accuracy look like from the perspective of the community versus like maybe super explicitly naming bias and harms if that's the type of
Right.
that we have to kind of dance around, which sucks because it's like it's more
It
things
does.
like it's just like more barriers or more things that we have to think through to get to like the direction that we want to do, which is like doing good for other people.
That makes perfect sense. And yeah, that's something that I'm sure others have also faced. It's just how do you thread that needle with like a lot of my all of my work and people I work with, they're grant funded. So there are cautions that are put in place to maintain this versus,
Yeah.
saying everything that wants to or needs to be said. So with that, that's why I worried about what other inputs are happening because this is a constantly evolving system. This is the train's already left the station.
Daily. Like like
So
I follow like a handful, and this is something that I'd recommend to folks
yeah.
too. Is like find those newsletters that like because
Mhm.
it's rapidly changing and it like is mentally overwhelming,
Yeah.
even for like. But like I follow like a handful of newsletters that come from like different perspectives. You have the people who are just like, "Yay, AI! Look at the new things that have like come out overnight." And then like from the perspective of like those like safety, responsible AI, the trust and privacy kind of environments. I said like, "Ooh, look what's coming out," and this is like why it could be an issue. But like those types of newsletters are really helpful for me to see like what stuff is coming, how is it evolving, because like to your point, the tool that you were using for like the SAS coding might have sucked yesterday, but like in a week it
Today
could
works great.
suddenly
Yeah.
be able to do it, like, right? So it's evolving
Mhm.
so rapidly, and that makes it really scary in some ways and exciting in others, but like the transparency around how the models are developed and deployed is still like incredibly murky, and I think a lot of it feels like it's kind of self-reported right now by the companies who are developing the tools, which like makes you ask like, okay, but
Bots in the
how
hen house.
honest are you genuinely being, and that sort of thing. So I think like one of the resources that I have within the second half section of the slides,
Nice.
like there's a couple that are like databases around AI risk and things of that sort that have like actually that have probably been like people have been sued about this or organizations have been sued about this. So like those could be like really interesting things to look at too as you're kind of thinking through use cases and applications to say like, oh, like where has this tripped up other people? And then like, so what do we need to think about or what questions do we need to ask to make sure that we're moving forward in the best way possible?
I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for sharing.
No, of course.
I'll get off the floor. Others can jump in.
Very helpful. Dennis, I hope your day gets better.
Same.
Um, okay, there's some great questions in the chat that I'm going to amplify while other people decide if they want to turn their microphones on. Emily, it's great to see you, Emily. I hope it's going well. Asks, is there already a best practice standard for organizations to disclose when tools like dashboards, reports, or program directions are built using AI? I've seen it in journalism and a bit when I went to my doctor, quote unquote, do you mind if AI takes notes for me?
Yeah.
But I haven't seen data analysis yet that says analyze using such and such AI tool or dashboard built using Claude. That's a great question.
No, it is a great question. And that's something that actually like I put in my guidelines that I made last year. And it's something that I practice with too, because I use AI the most for content generation, like it's research or content generation. And from that perspective, it's text. I'm not asking it to do analysis off of like row level employee data, that sort of thing.
Right.
But like what I do is I put a call out, like usually on like the first slide at the bottom in the footnote and says like, this document was created or drafted using like X AI tool and was like thoroughly reviewed by like these people. I think and that's a really low level thing to do because that's just you saying like I did it. But I think like what takes it to the next step is making sure that you have like protocols for whoever is represented in the data or whoever the data might come or whoever might come across the data, that if they feel like something is inaccurate within something that was produced by AI, they have explicit and clear steps to then like raise that and for it to then be addressed by the people who like own the product, it could be like the dashboard, the report, or whatever. So I think there's like a loop of like in that sense that can be applied, and then even like between those or probably before those two things, it's like if you have the opportunity to review the output, not if, but like you should build in time to review the output like yourself, but bring in subject matter experts, the community, so that you're interrogating it before it even gets published, still having that call out that like AI was used to develop this thing, and that extra step of like, and if you feel like or notice something that's inaccurate, here's what you can do for that to be addressed.
I think that's such a cool response because it highlights the fact that what already were best practices in creating analysis about humans have just become that much more important, right?
Yeah.
You can use the time that you've gained by using these AI tools to actually implement some of these feedback loops and human in the machine. Like that's one of the real advantages. And if you don't do that, you can really scale harm quite quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
So, the comments and questions are pouring in. We won't get time to them all, but we'll transfer the ones we don't get to over to the forum. So meet us over there. But a really common thread coming in, and I don't know if you can speak to this directly, Danica, or not, but is you shared some great stuff about making sure there was clear like guidelines and governance to the people who would be analyzing the data. Have you seen anything implemented about how it gets communicated to the employees that are present in the HR data, how their data is getting used?
Not as much. That
Yeah,
is,
yeah, yeah. I figured.
it's an interesting space because I think there's like from an employee perspective, like there's an assumed relationship and like things that go alongside that
Yeah.
relative to like an organization and an employee, right? Like we know that we sign a whole horde of like paperwork and things of that sort to make sure that like we get paid, that taxes are taken out, that we've got the benefits we need. And then there's a bunch of data that gets generated just as like you live and breathe within an organization, hopefully not literally based off of those activities, but like, you know, like you change jobs, you get promoted, like you've got like a bonus, like additional data gets collected around that. I think that like, but this is an area that I would love to get into, and like I think part of this will show up within my data governance work. While it's like about data governance in general, there is an element of making sure that those activities are in service of making employee data AI ready. But there is an aspect there where like we want to make sure people are, or like I would like to, in an ideal world, make sure that employees know like what data we have about them, that they know how to correct the data we have about them, especially when it comes to like that personal information, things of that sort. And then when it comes to like AI tools, and this is where it gets like really difficult and where you hit the tensions of I think between like ethics and like respecting like data sovereignty and autonomy versus like operational efficiencies. Because like I previously worked at a 20,000 person organization. I now work at like a 200 to 300,000 person organization. Like there's an element of it's like you can't let every single person decide every little aspect of how their data is used, but like where do we give them the choices, and where do we, to like what I said earlier, have an opt-in versus an opt-out model. So for standard HR practices, it might be like, these are standard HR practices. Like we absolutely need this data to do these things, but like where are the places where it's like they may not be standard HR practices, and we can be a little bit more flexible and give people the option to like opt into things versus opt out. And I've seen employees like advocate for that kind of stuff in places like employee surveys where they say like, well, what if I don't want my manager to be able to like see analysis representing me? And for us, we're just like, well, we don't show your individual responses to your manager. We show aggregated, and it has to be X number of employees in order for them to see it. But they're just like, but I want to opt out. Like, can I have that option? And then that's also where it's like, well, we're using this specific tool and it doesn't really allow that, or we would have to like feed it through something else. It becomes a lot more complex. So yeah, I haven't myself like really seen it done in the way that I described, but it is one of those things where I'm just like, once I get the foundation set for this project, I would love to like experiment in that space and potentially being like, let's be best in class in this and show others how it can be done.
That's why I'm so looking forward to having you as our guest, Danica, because you're so aware and good at articulating the balancing act of reality. It's very easy to write an only idealist, hyperbolic screed one direction or the other around this stuff. And then you're sharing your lived experience and your wisdom about the pros and cons and the balance is just incredibly valuable. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course.
I have a couple more questions. I think we probably have time for one or two. And again, if you're in the room and you want to turn your mic on, either raise your Zoom hand or turn your mic on, because we have time for probably two more questions. One of them is I am in charge of a small health nonprofit where we collect a lot of messy data. We have a small budget for the next 6 months. Do you think I should spend that budget on tools, training my staff, or improving my data quality? And again, you're not going to be responsible for this question. And that's this person. I know this person. They know that. But
so what were like the three
should I
options?
like tools, customized proprietary tools, training my staff how to use AI responsibly, or improving our data quality in preparation for AI for the next 6 months?
Such a short period of time. Okay. Yeah, there's an element of like a build versus buy conversation in there. And that's something that
Right.
shows up in organizations a lot and something that like my team gets pulled into of like, do we build a dashboard internally or do we go out and buy it? Because sometimes when it comes to if you need to get certain functionality or benefits like really quickly and urgently, the build internally can take a lot more time because you're having to deal with like capacity and things of that sort. Whereas like the buy, it's like there's a product that already exists out there in the market. We just have to, pick one and like work with our like consultants or like the experts or whatever to help us like stand it up. But then you also have the question of data quality, and that is such a huge thing because like you can still have the AI tool, but if it doesn't um if your data is like not just like messy data, because messy data might just be unstructured data, but if it's like not quality data, then you can feed that through an AI tool, and you're still going to get like that's going to impact the quality of the output you get. So
Mhm.
it's one of those things where like you can probably choose a combination of those things versus doing like one over the other. But I would prioritize like the quality piece in addition to one of the other pieces, because regardless of whether you're going to build or buy something, you want to make sure that like you're putting in as clean data as possible. Nothing's going to be 100% perfect. That's like the reality of it. But within like the scope of healthcare, there's an element of like, what is this data? Like, what data are you collecting and what is it going to be used for? In which case, that quality is going to be super, super critical. And you're
Yeah.
probably looking at use case or could potentially be looking at use cases that are like much more in that high risk area because of like the implications it could have on the people represented within the data.
Yeah. I love the way you're framing that. And I think that there's a lot of like that fear of missing out. Like the FOMO is high right now.
Yeah.
And
But it's the real constraints too, right? Like I know, like I've been feeling this in like in my space of employment. I know this is happening across the board. Like the economy's in a really weird, unstable, funky place. Like organizations are tightening their budgets. You have turnover, you have layoffs, and like you
yep.
have less people who are expected to do the same, if not more work. So that pressure to adopt AI to help release capacity and get
Right.
things done without like drowning your staff is very, very real. And at the same time, this is where we have to like be extra cautious and say like, okay, I understand this is real, and like we still need to do our due diligence and make sure that we're caring for the people represented within the data.
I think that's the perfect note to end this on. I am so, so grateful for Danica, you coming and sharing your amazing experience. And I've just put the link in the chat again. We promise that we will upload the recording and an amazing amount of resources that Danica has curated for us. That'll all be a couple hours in the chat. In the Data Equity Forum. And you can keep asking questions there. There are all kinds of people from all kinds of sectors that will answer your questions. That's actually how we got here to this edition of Data Equity. Talking Data Equity was a conversation in the forum. And we are back next week. Our guest next week is, Denise Ross, the Chief Data Scientist of the United States of America under President Biden, and Beth Jaros, who is probably the leading expert, or definitely one of the leading experts on US Census and American Community Survey data. And they are going to come and share with us some new tools that they're developing to help us navigate the turbulence that Danica was talking about in terms of data in the US ecosystem and the economy. Same time, same Zoom link. So please come back or send your friends. And last but not least, many of us have had a hard morning and most of us have had a hard month. So you're very, very important to us and to the community. And none of this would matter if there wasn't all of you coming each Friday, week after week, and reminding each other that you care as people, you care as professionals, and the work that you're doing matters, and you're not doing it alone. And take really good care of yourselves. Thank you so much, Danica. We'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.